Welcome to AMIcast, podcast about Amiga computers. I'm your host, Krzysztof Radzikowski, but call me Krzysztof or Radzik. Hi, it's number 24 of AMIcast. So, again, I think cool episode with Jon, and this guy is behind the Amibian JavaScript project. I can say like this?
Yeah.
Okay, because this is JS, yeah, but this is JavaScript, yeah?
Yeah, it's JavaScript, but when you run it, it's actually compiled into machine code. So it's ASM.js, I guess is the technical term. But yeah, JavaScript is good.
Okay, let's do it for noobs. At the beginning. Okay, so nice to have you here, and I think it will be interesting interview because the project it looks like very nice, and even there is website that we can go and try offline. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, of course, and. Yeah, there's a build site. I'm ashamed to say that it hasn't been updated for a little while. I've been busy with normal life and normal work, so I haven't been able to, keep it up to date. But there's a new version coming out soon, so people can go in and check how it's working out. And when I get the server part is actually the most important thing now. So that people can actually connect to a server, log in, see that the credentials are accepted, and all those tiny details that makes for a good server system.
Okay, we will put the link in the description. Basically, looks nice, looks good. But before we start with this stuff, traditional, how your Amiga journey was started, or the beginning of the computer in general in your life, and then why Amiga and why still now?
Starting with my computers. Well, I guess I was 9 or 10 years old when I got a Commodore 64. I had an uncle in Scotland which actually gave me I think it was a ZX81 or a ZX Spectrum or something before that, but it didn't really catch on, this tiny dinky little thing. And then of course Commodore 64 came out or became very popular in Norway, and all the kids were playing games and stuff like that. And I did the same thing. I think that was around the time when I stopped going to soccer practice. So I was very interested in the computing part. And then I started experimenting with BASIC. Commodore 64 had a couple examples in the Commodore BASIC. And
this blue screen, yeah?
Yeah, the blue screen, and you can get a ball bouncing and stuff. It was really fun. So I was more interested in actually how are people doing this, all this magic on the screen. And I started investigating. And then, of course, after a few years, the Amiga came out. And like everybody else, I was, blown away by the graphics and all this, completely magical stuff. This leap from going from, Commodore 64, which was a sort of terminal system. Mm-hmm. We have the blue screen and typing text and stuff. Yep. And suddenly you're in a window-based environment. You can run applications and you can run games and stuff like that.
But you are direct to this Workbench, or because most people start they format the Workbench diskettes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I didn't do that. I had Workbench, of course. My first computer was our Amiga was an Amiga 1000, so you had to take really good care of that kickstart. Yeah. And then, of course, you had a ton of games, and every weekend, me and my friends would sit around the computer playing games and having competitions and stuff like that. And then when my friends left, I would get out some programming stuff and sit and try to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think I was doing a lot of basic programming in the beginning, like most people do. And then I switched to assembler because that was what all the cool kids were using. So I switched to, I think it was Kumaseka assembler, and then it was ASM1, and then suddenly Blitz Basic came out. That was, wow, Blitz Basic, you can mix basic, simple commands for opening screens and stuff, and you can mix that with assembler, and at the same time, or probably earlier, you had Amos Basic, which was really fun to make games in. Demos and stuff. Sadly, it was a runtime system. It wasn't really a compiled system, so you had to ship, this huge runtime with. If you created a demo, so it was seen, it was sort of frowned upon in the demo scene. But Blitz Basic was really cool. You could, spit out executables.
Okay.
So it's been a part of my growing up, the whole Amiga thing. I used to have one in my room, and it was on all the time. Falling asleep to the click of the drive and stuff. It was always on. And of course, when I joined, the cracker groups and things like that, I think I got the mailman used to come, with a bunch of letters that was sort of taped together, a huge bundle almost every day, and he was wondering, what kind of business are you guys doing? And my mother would, business? We're not running a business. This is a normal home. They're for my son. He's into computers. And I was, swapping disks and send back the postage. He used to cheat on the stamps and stuff. Take glue on. Yeah, he took glue on the stamps.
Can you tell us how you go into this scene or cracked teams, and because you were on the Quartex, and so on, yeah. So this is really impressive CV. Yeah.
Well, I started out in a Norwegian group called The Band, and they changed the name to Triumph after a little while. So we did a lot of demos, and through the swapping, because I continued to do the swapping. Most people, if they were accepted as a coder, they would stop swapping because that was for lamers. But I continued because I had this huge access to games and programming tools. So I got talking with somebody in Alpha Flight, and I think it was Alpha Flight Germany. And I was accepted there. Yeah, sure, you can join. I didn't do any cracks for them. I started on some intros, but then I didn't hear anything from them in a long time. So, and then I got an offer from, I think that was in France, from Cortex, France or Germany, I don't really remember, if I wanted to join them. And yeah, sure. And I had a modem and, connected to the BBSs and got talking and yeah. So that was fun. So then it just, kept on swapping a little bit and mostly coding. But of course, then after a little while, the police had this huge crackdown on Cortex, specifically Cortex, because they were really rampant pirate copying, especially in Germany and France. I think also Britain, I'm not sure.
But I heard that the Piracy was really big in Germany, and of course, for sure, Poland as well, but this was later. But at the beginning, there's even some more documents film about this. It was really aggressive, yeah.
But Cortex was, and I guess the group is known for that. They were very arrogant, didn't really care too much about the status quo, so they were quite open with what they were doing. And they also, of course, made the mistake of using, instead of using a postbox, they used home addresses in the crack shows and stuff like that, because nobody can touch them. But how the details work out, I'm not sure. But I know that there was a huge operation, and Cortex was completely wiped out by the cops. And of course, I lived up in Norway, so I was fairly protected. They couldn't get to me, but and of course, I was just a kid. I just didn't really know what I was doing. Cracking games and stuff like that was just fun. And of course, as an adult working as a software developer, I have, it's been a sort of a karma. A few of my products have been cracked, and you go, damn, you lose all that time. And I was thinking, I guess I can't complain. You can't really do anything.
Basically, of course, this Piracy stuff was, it's not maybe good or was not good, but I think without this period, this whole IT revolution will never happen, because
it's what made Piracy can make a platform. For example, the reason that people bought Amigas was, of course, all the games. And you didn't think, there's a lot of games I could buy. You think that, there's a lot of games you can copy, because you went straight from Commodore 64, right? Where you simply would copy a tape. It was super simple. And turbo tape, 100 games on a 90-minute cassette. And of course, so you got used to it. We were sort of grew up with the idea that games are free. Or you can be a nice guy and you can go and buy them. And the only reason people actually bought the games was because of, the cool boxes. That was the only reason to buy a game. I actually tend to buy games even today that if they're good games, then I will support them. I will go out and buy it. And same with movies. Maybe I can download a movie or something. But if it's a good movie and I like it, then I will pay for it. So I tried to have a little moral standing, but of course, having cracked so many games, I can't really say. I don't have the moral high ground anymore. But,
now it's much easier because you have this stuff like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Spotify, for example. So basically, it's easy not to steal.
Yeah, it's I guess that's the only protection you can actually have. It's a bit like open source, right? So if you're going to stop people from copying you, then you either have to have a flawless, copy protection, which of course doesn't exist, or you can make it so open and so available that nobody's going to bother to copy it. That's the only way you can solve it, actually, I think.
Just maybe one fast question and just short to, let's say, make an example, or how is it hard, or how hard it is to crack game, for example? Because I remember the games with the, I don't know, special book that has some special codes that you must type in, and it was a lot of work, or
it depends. Some of them were super simple. For example, I haven't coded Amiga in 2 decades or something now, but I remember that the games that were simple to take were those that had like a custom bootloader, and then they would have a custom sector format or something. Mm-hmm. So, and it was a bit silly because the bootloader was always accessible. So if you could rip the bootloader, which most debuggers could, then you had the assembly, and of course the boot block was very small, so it was easy to, you had to come up with something magical if other people wouldn't understand the machine code. And of course everybody was coding 68K, so it wasn't really that hard to understand what they were doing. Those were the simplest because they didn't really have any other protection except what they were doing with the sectors. The hard ones were actually those that were coded in C++ or C. I'm not sure if C++ existed back then.
Yeah.
But because the C compiler, it spit out so much opcode stuff, stack alignments, and God knows how much crap they put into that, and so you had to really sit there and wade through tons of machine code, and then suddenly you would find maybe the part of the program that contains all the rules, like the part that shows the locking thing that you have to unlock in order to use the game, like LucasArts, for example. They had all these code wheels and stuff like that. So you had to sort of recognize that logic, and then of course you had to simply figure out where in the program are they going if everything is okay. And when you got that offset, then you simply would go back to the beginning and insert a jump to that address. So it would simply skip. It would simply skip over the whole, checking things. So you would just disable it or fill it with no operation instructions or something like that. And that's it. And then it's a matter of just writing out the files and making sure they can find each other and cracked by Cortex. That's it. It's just a stupid child game. It's a bit like kids today, they sit around and play with Sudoku or something like that. And we use these, mind games, trying to, who can crack this fastest. I think I was never the fastest, but I believe I did pretty good work, at least. If you can call it work. It's just,
Basically, I think you learn a lot of this, and this is some kind of our culture, on demosing culture and so on. So it is included in history.
Yeah, but the learning part is, completely unique. I mean, I was really lucky because I ended up with these guys that had so much knowledge, and there was guys that were, 5 to 10 years older than me, and they knew so much, and I would learn more about programming in a day with those guys than I would learn in a month or two at school later. So when I finally, got to the point when I was going to college, I was actually offered a teaching position after quite a short time, because I always ended up, correcting the teacher and helping him. And no, that's not right. That's if you do this, then that will happen, and blah blah blah. And he would look at me and, okay, maybe you should take over, John. Okay, So, but I didn't really learn that much. I actually past 2 years at college, I didn't really show up at all. I stayed at home, and then I showed up for the exams, and I aced the exams, and then I went on because I was already working as a programmer by then, and that was due to the things I learned on the Amiga. And I think that's true for a lot of programmers, that they wouldn't be developers today, or at least as good developers today, if it wasn't for the Amiga. I mean, kids today, they grow up with JavaScript. I mean, we grew up with, basic and machine code. So the learning curve is, completely different. Today, they put baby wheels and, they sandbox, every corner. And, oh, be careful. And they put you in a protected environment to program. I mean, we didn't do that. If you crashed a pointer or jumped to the wrong address, then boom, your computer went down. Then you had to reset and go back to start. True. Yeah, now you have all this protected. I think it's actually doing more harm than good. You have kids growing up who, I actually had a conversation with a guy, and all he knew was JavaScript, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with JavaScript if you know how to use it properly. But he actually didn't know anything else. He didn't know, assembler or C++ or Delphi or Free Pascal or anything. So it was just JavaScript. And he actually had the audacity to say that JavaScript was better than assembler. At which point I asked him if his mother had dropped him when he was a kid. Is there something wrong with you? I said, you don't know what you're talking about. But he was 100% convinced that JavaScript, that you can actually write like a bootloader or a kernel in JavaScript. And I was like, well, okay, try. Please write a kernel in JavaScript and make an x86 system, for example, boot off that. It's not going to happen. It won't work. You can't even use C# for that unless you have
this. I think even noob like me knows because.
So the computers have different levels. You have an assembler in the bottom, and then you just take one step up, and then you have C or Pascal, and then you take another step up, and then you have C++, and you have Object Pascal and all those objective languages. So it moves up in stages. And you can't take the rules from one level and apply that to a lower level, for example. That's not going to work. You can only apply forward or from the bottom and up. And, and that is something that you learn this if you go to college or university, hopefully.
This could be a good question, because basically I see what is happening now, not only in developing stuff, in real life, as let's say, as well. And for example, Apple made the Swift language now, even the application for iPad to learn. But I think the trend is like this to force the younger guys to be developers, but maybe not so hardcore like you said, that truly only, because I think the program is made like this, you make the one piece, another guy will make one piece, then another one, and join and somehow working because of memory protection and this protective stuff.
There's no problem in having component-based development. I mean, if you use free Pascal or if you use C++, you will be used to creating isolated components, right? That's a sort of fundamental part of object-oriented programming, and that's fine. And then you can join, the project together and stuff like that. There's no problem with that. The problem is that you have languages now that don't follow the rules. So I guess you can divide them into two parts. So you have archetypical languages. For example, the C language and Pascal. Those are archetypical languages. Those are the languages that you would use to create other languages. So those are sort of fundamental, and they are made in a way. The way that they look so strange, and you have to use all this strange syntax, is because that's the way a computer works. But now you also have, I guess, what you can call optimistic languages, but it's not in a negative way. But optimistic languages are, for example, C#, Java, and various forms of scripting languages as well, which are not based on computing rules. They are based on how human beings would like things to be. So they don't really fit in. For example, is it only recently, I think Microsoft added a native compiler to C#. Before that, there was Xamarin had the Mono native compiler, but none of them have really been real compilers, so to speak, because you still need, the huge infrastructure around a C# program. I think RemObjects, it was originally a German company, but they moved to the States. It's the only one that's actually produced a real C# compiler. So you can actually write a Linux kernel in C# now if you use their compiler. But that has been impossible before because it's an optimistic language. It doesn't really follow the rules of how computing is done. The alignment of bytes, the way things work. All the other languages, the archetypical languages, follow that, and that's also why I've learned a lot of the new languages, but I refuse to use them because at the end of the day, you always end up going back to the real languages, so to speak. I've had services that I've developed for large companies, oil companies in particular. And there's no room for services going down. If you have a couple of servers, for example, that need to operate 24/7, they need to deal with large payloads, terabytes of data being shipped between servers. You don't have room to dicky around with C# and Java is going to, it will crash and burn within a month. And we've tried it. We've actually tried it. So it's not just, some fanboy statement. We've actually tried these different things. And we ended up going back to writing our services in, we had some top-level services written in Delphi, and which are super robust. And then we also had a few lower-level, DLL files and stuff like that, libraries, which were written in C. So you end up going back there, and that's where the Amiga background comes in, because you're used to this. You're used to writing stuff at a lower level. You're not afraid of pointers or memory allocations and stuff like that, because you've been doing this since you were a kid. And the kids growing up today, they have actually been taught that direct memory access, that's dangerous. No, it isn't. Just remember to check things before you use them and follow the rules, and things will be good. But it's a completely different way of growing up. And I see a lot of ex-Amiga developers, both those that were in Triumph and other Norwegian groups, that are now, either CEOs or head of departments, development departments that I've met over the years. And the reason that they have become that is because of the Amiga, and they recognize it. I remember I actually got a job once because I had Amiga background. This was for one of the largest companies in Europe, which was a bit fun. It was one of those places, where you have a dress code, you go to work in a suit and stuff like that, which is totally not my style, but I needed to work, or a job, so I went in there and I was a bit nervous, and then this slick guy was sitting there, with his fancy iPad interview and stuff like that. And then he asked about my background, and he noticed that, quite a long way down on my CV, there was, 68K programming and a few Amiga things I did. And he was, oh, you went to Amiga? Oh, what group were you in? I started talking, and it took 10 minutes and I had the job. Because he knew that, like you said, he was a programmer as well. So he knew that if you've been programming on the Amiga, then the stuff you're going to do. Yeah, it would be a piece of cake, to do the other stuff.
I think it's really corresponding with the other stuff, like musician guys or graphic guys, because a lot of graphic artists are coming from Amiga, and these days I remember that no shading in Lightwave. It was possible to do stuff, and now when I work with... I'm not the graphic designer, but I'm working with graphic because I'm a mechanical engineer, so everything you made in CAD programs. And the young guys, when you tell them switch to the wires because you don't need to hide objects or something, just select this. Oh, no, they don't see in wires, yeah?
No, it's the same thing everywhere. I mean, there's a sort of procession, right? I mean, just like you have gone through an evolution from the time you were a kid, and all the people, everyone that's grown up with the Amiga, and it doesn't matter if it's programming or pixel arts, and then of course the evolution going from deluxe paint to Lightwave, right? And you learn something. You learn something about the nature of graphics. That you can apply to the next stage, because like I said, you can only apply knowledge forward. You can't apply it backwards. Yeah. And this is the same thing. So you collect all this knowledge as you move along and apply it to what you do. So I think it's an evolution that is unique. And I feel so bad for example, a few of the Americans that are my friends that never had the Amiga. I mean, they grew up with Nintendo and one of the first Apple machines. And when I showed them in the Amiga when they were over visiting me, they were just, oh my God, So they couldn't believe that, so this is an American product that never caught on in America. They never even heard about it until they grew up, right? And this product was then shipped out of the US and sold like hotcakes in Europe. And you guys grew up with that, while we had the DKE SNES or the Nintendo and Apple II and whatnot. So they were super jealous. You grew up with that? Oh my God! I had 16 colors on a Mac.
This is the best is now that the whole story it's made by the winners. So basically, it looks like there was revolutionary Apple, and then basically nothing. They were the best from the beginning, and
I saw there was a movie on Netflix about, I think, the history of gaming or something like that.
I saw something on Discovery Channel, but there mentioned there were only Atari, Apple, of course Nintendo, and so on, but zero Amiga,
Yeah, it's the same here. It was you could see all the consoles, from the Nintendo and upwards, and then of course Atari, and then they actually, I think they mentioned the Atari ST or something as a sort of a side comment on the Atari 2800, was that or something?
26.
Yeah, something.
The first console, the black one.
Yeah, the ugly ones. I can't stand Atari. Even to this day, see an Atari and the Antichrist.
But they are coming back, and probably I think they will make it better than our Amiga now. Yeah.
No, it's evil is stirring in Mordor. No, I don't know. I think I've actually signed up as a developer just to get a look at it, and I've only seen the pictures that everybody else has seen. And it looks cool. I mean, it's sure. And then they have, you can actually order one with they have the wooden front panel and stuff, which is a bit retro, but it is cool. But I'm actually thinking that the only possible thing that they can do to establish something today, and if you look at the company, Atari was brought back from the dead by some investor. And they have actually survived by remaking some of the old Atari games, with better graphics and stuff like that, selling on the Android platform primarily, I think. It's also available for iOS, but I'm not sure.
I think they have some hits or something like this.
Yeah.
You must have stuff on iOS. Because...
But then you have to, of course, think, okay, how are they going to get this running on a new system? Because I think they have a portfolio of games. Now they're making a game machine, which is the most obvious or the most cost-effective way of doing that. And of course, that would be an ARM device with connections, probably a fork of Android with some sort of shop on top of Google Play or something. And then all they have to do is basically write a full-screen menu system, really. So I'm suspecting that's what we're going to see, an Android-based device. But I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, because if it's an Android device, then I'm not going to code a line for it. I can't stand Java. So I used to hear NDK all the way. If it works, who knows? I mean, it's just for gaming. I mean, I come in with all this baggage of what I think about Atari and Java and blah, blah, blah. But that, of course, is completely irrelevant to a gamer, to a person that doesn't care what it's written in as long as it's fun. No. So who knows? Maybe it will catch on. But I'm actually secretly hoping that Trevor would somehow magically get the tabor out before Atari and beat them to the punch.
About this we will talk, but
sorry.
Slowly we should jump to Amibian project and your part. But before, because we are talking about Atari, and now Trevor, do you think there are this batch Atari or batch Commodore or batch Amiga is still worth something to bring a product and sell it, or this is only dinosaurs like we are that they know?
I think that the brand is the only thing that they actually have of value. For example, I mean, take Atari. I mean, who would care anything about Atari, right? Mm-hmm. My son, for example, is 12 years old, and he's gaming on his PC. He doesn't even know what Atari is. Yeah. The first time he saw floppy disk was, I think, a year ago when I brought the Amiga 500 out of storage. He had never seen one before. I started kickoff and I gave him a joystick and he didn't even know what to do with it. So you have, two generations that have grown up without this. They have never seen a tape recorder. They have never seen a cassette, VHS or otherwise. So they don't know what this is. They have no clue, and those brands mean nothing to them. And then Atari, of course, came out now, and it was quickly spread all over the place. But the people that are actually interested in are older people, people in their 30s and 40s.
This is like making Nintendo now with this SNES and so on mini edition, yeah?
Yeah. So it's I think that if you were to write down the age of all the people that have bought, like the Nintendo remake, and the same also, wasn't there Sega as well? Sega Master System or something?
Are they doing something? Or but I think now it's trendy to make the mini version of.
Yeah, but I think that if you write down the age of the customers, I think you will find that they are not kids. They are grown-up people that remember these things and want to keep them alive, same as I do. I mean, I'm not running around, promoting Amiga or something, but if people ask me about computers, then of course I will mention it, because it's a valuable part of, if not American history, then European history. It's actually a great shame that it hasn't been recognized in the States as much as it should be, because it came from the United States. So it's a credit to them, really. But I think that most people that are going to keep or give Atari the necessary funds to actually keep going are people in their 30s and 40s. And I think that will also be true for the Amiga. I haven't seen any 16-year-old kids on the Amiga forums. The average age is, I mean, if you take an average cut, I think it will end up with 35 or something, or 39 maybe. So it's grown-up people that are doing this and reminiscing about the lost childhood or whatever. But I think that they can build on that, because there are millions of us. So of course they can build on it and use those brands still. There's still time, but I think that in 10 years' time, unless something magical happens, then Commodore and the Commodore sign and stuff like that, the symbol is going to just be an echo from the past. It's it's like if you go into a used and bought shop where they sell old stuff, right? You can find some old insignias from before the Second World War and stuff like that, and they mean nothing to you, because you don't know what the symbols means. You have no idea what the meaning is behind them, or why somebody would be proud to get that medal or something. So it's just you look at them and look at those, and then you just move along, because it is meaningless to you. And I think that is happening to Atari and Commodore as well. Right now you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who remember Commodore, they remember the Amiga, and they associate that with fun, right? So you see the Commodore logo and you associate that with fun. And you see the word Amiga and you also associate that with, we had some great times and stuff. So you have that association. And that is still worth something, but in 10 years' time, it's probably going to be. So they have it, I would say, a 10-year runway to make this happen.
Okay. So
after that, it's game over, I think.
Okay, so I think now I must continue this topic, because we cannot now jump to Amibian.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I have, I think you have a lot of right here, and. What I see this, let's say, more or less the same. I think there are still time to make something, but I'm end user or powerful user, but not developer, nothing like this. But I think now the progress is really slow on mostly NG system, because I think if you want to survive, this can be only made by an NG system. If this is not only nostalgia, but when you see the progress of Morpheus, basically it's nothing now. Amiga OS is better, but I'm always complaining about web browser. and this is 4 years old, and so on, so on. So basically, I think we are start to be out of time because and the people are not young. You have probably right. It's hard to have the time to code between, or like me, make a podcast between real life, but in 10 years, it will be even harder because I will be half day in hospital probably, or something.
But there is still time to do this. But of course, it's like we brushed into earlier. It has to do, time is a factor. But I think it all boils down to money, of course. If you have 10 millions to throw at this, there's no problem getting developers. But of course, with the mess that has been with patents and things like that, it's I think it's a dangerous area to go in. I think Trevor is very brave that has jumped into this, and he has done, in my view, the only logical thing you can do. So, if you look at, Morpheus, and then you have arrows, and then you have a couple of forks of those, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least arrows. And then you have Amiga OS 4, and then you have the classical stuff. But all the classical stuff is sort of caught in a sort of a time prison, I guess you can call it almost. Because you have different people who owns different patents, right? And they've been fighting for 2 decades now. Who owns what? And then, of course, behind those again, you have people who are stuck with spare parts. I don't remember where I read about it, but I think it was Amiga Future or something. Mm-hmm. Some guy in Netherlands or Switzerland or something that had a ton of CPUs stock that he invested in back in the 90s. And he had sort of given up on them, that after the Amiga crashed and Apple stopped using the 68K, he was looking at it, like, oh, it's lost cause. So we just let the boxes be. And then suddenly, after a little while, when the Amiga retro scene got built up, suddenly there was a market for this. And these guys have been, selling CPUs and selling spare parts on eBay, actually making, decent money. Because now they can actually charge more than it used to cost. So suddenly you have a group of people that are actually not interested in a new Amiga system, because that would actually sort of kill off their business and their chance to get some return on that old investment from the 90s. So Trevor, like I said, I think he's been very brave because he's facing sort of enemies on all sides. And the only logical thing you can do, okay, the old hardware is locked in different patent questions, and it would probably be a legal nightmare to try to wrestle that out. And besides, the hardware is so old that for modern computing, it's not even it's not suitable anymore. It's fun to play with, and it's a magical system, but you can't really do modern programming with it. So okay, that's the hardware. So just leave that and say, fine, let's leave the old hardware alone. Where does that leave us? And that leaves you with either you create something new, or you have to go the software way, which is the way that Arrows has done, right? Okay, we don't care about the hardware. We want an operating system that is, the Amiga OS, and we want that to be free. And they have spent
20 years over.
Yeah, 15, 20 years on that. And I don't want to be negative, because writing an operating system from scratch, drivers, and doing all of that while you have a day job is probably one of the most impressive programming projects I've seen. 20 years, oh my God. But at the same time, it has been so slow that it has missed so many opportunities to actually, bring this OS as a third alternative, or a fourth alternative if you count Linux. Mm-hmm. They've missed the boat. And then the Raspberry Pi came out, which is perfect for Arrows. And the only thing you can get, I'm not sure what it's called. Broadway or something.
Yeah, there's Broadway from Pascal, I think.
Yeah, and it's great. I bought that. It's great. It runs like the wind. It's the fastest system I've ever tried on a Raspberry Pi. It's perfect. But of course, he's just one guy. I mean, this should have been fixed ages ago. You should have had, a native Arrows version for Raspberry Pi, USB drivers and everything. I think I've been waiting now for 4 years for USB drivers, so that you can, plug in a mouse and keyboard and stuff. And it would be perfect. It's perfect, It's because Arrows and the Amiga OS is so cost effective. Mm-hmm. This is a system that was written to run in 512K of memory. So of course it's super efficient. But back to the hardware, I mean, those are the two ways that you can go. You can write a new operating system and make that run on x86 and ARM and MIPS and whatever you can get your hands on. Or you can write or create a whole new platform, hardware-based platform, which is what Trevor has done. And there's still time. There's still time to go that way, because people love hardware. We love new devices, and even people that haven't used an Amiga before will think that, okay, you can get this kick-ass game system, providing that it is a kick-ass game system, for around $400, and it also doubles as a computer with a great operating system. Sure, that's a good deal. I think we need a small system that is fun to use and good to use. But like you say, the operating system needs a better web browser. That's sort of a fundamental thing today. The web browser is almost more important than the operating system.
Yeah, I think it's basically can be operating system.
Yeah, it's sort of become an extension. I see that with my son, for example. I turn on my computer, and for me, the computer is the desktop, right? And also a few of the sub-levels. But as a programmer, you work on the desktop, you start Visual Studio or Delphi or Free Pascal or whatever you program in, and it all takes place on the desktop. But for my son, he couldn't care less. For him, the computer is either the browser or Steam. Those are the two things that he uses, right? And for my daughter, the computer is all about YouTube, because then she can watch videos and sing and do all the girly stuff. So for her, that's it. Watching. She watches Netflix and YouTube, and that's basically it. And next year, she will start, doing some homework on the computer. But desktop, that doesn't mean anything to them. So there's they need to have a good browser. And I actually, I hope I'm not speaking out of place. But I actually have been talking to Trevor about a few things. He's really a great guy, and he also mentioned that they are actually working on the browser problem. So that's I don't know if he has mentioned that publicly, and maybe he will get mad at me for mentioning it, but I know that this is something that they are working on. So I'm looking forward to so I'm looking forward to seeing the only problem, from what I understand, of the PowerPC, I haven't really programmed that much on the PowerPC, is that the byte alignment is the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard that the problem is in Odyssey, the JavaScript and this JTI implementation, because of these Indian issues. Yeah. And like I talked with some guys during interview, after interview, some developers. Basically, everybody says to me this is not possible to write on the new browser or updated browser for Amiga OS. It's no go, because it's too heavy to do it or to port it, and nobody cares. So it's not. Yeah, sorry. I'm in panic because I cannot write, and I can use my X5000 every day, and I wrote the book. But I wrote the book about this. But without Odyssey, I cannot use this computer every day.
Yeah, no, but it isn't. It can't be that hard. At least if you look at the code base, for example, if you go into the Google Chrome GitHub repo and look at the code. It's 90% standard C++ code. So the problem is things like masking. If you're using a bit mask, for example, for flags or something like that, then those, since you have a completely different engine, those are swapped, and of course you can end up with testing the wrong bits. So the bit, the bit, testing code has to be, rewritten for the engine, which is really, of course, time consuming. It's not impossible, and it's been done several times with, different systems in the past. It's like, the old Macs, for example. Microsoft ported the whole Word package, Word and Excel and stuff like that from the PC to the old Macs, and those had a different engine. And it's a time-consuming, terrible thing to do, but you have to do it. And this is also why I'm a huge advocate of, when you write code, then don't optimize it with those old-time tricks, like there's a whole bunch of coding tricks that you can do, maybe to shave off a clock cycle here and there, make the code go faster or something like that. Avoid those. When you write code, and write code that is maintainable. You can
I know what you mean. From my point of view, because I designed the parts, and this is the program that built the parts with history. So first you have this operation, then. But when you mess it up, the guy, and you are on the holidays, the guy that must rework it is that man.
Yeah. So stay away from that and stick to the standards. And maybe that's, like we talk about programming languages, that's probably one of the few things that have actually become better with the optimistic languages, that they shield you from doing those mistakes, or they force you, actually is probably a better word, which of course I hate, because I would like to have the freedom to do whatever I like, but they actually force you to write code that
idiot-proof.
Yeah, it's sort of idiot-proof, but at the cost of performance and portability. But they force you at least to write code that you can recompile later. And that has actually been the selling point of, for example, .NET, that you write the program on Windows, and then you should, in theory, be able to compile it on the Mac as well. And this isn't completely true. It depends on what framework you're using. If you're using the Windows framework, then naturally that is for Windows only. But vanilla code, like a library or a package that doesn't call the operating system, that implements something in C# or Visual Basic or whatever, will of course compile on a different operating system. And this is also true for most of C++. There are a few subtle differences between GCC and C++ Builder or Visual Studio, but those are superficial. If you write vanilla C code, then that should compile, unless you're doing something magical like bit shifting or bit testing, or leave the bits alone. Do an array of bytes or something instead, because then you don't have to care about stuff like that. So it's and then things will be portable. But porting over, for example, the latest Chromium or WebKit core, it would probably take some months to do that. But it's not impossible. It's time consuming. I would have done it myself, but I have to admit that my strength is actually Object Pascal. That is what I've been working in now for 20 years. And then I mix. When I have the chance, I break my own rules and I mix in just a little bit of sampler to make it go faster and stuff. But my official training is as a Delphi expert. And of course, Delphi isn't the most popular language these days, but Free Pascal has, I think, I don't remember how many 100,000 users, but in the world and general, there's about a bit over 2 million Object Pascal, both Delphi and Free Pascal developers. But I would have done it myself, but I need to finish my studies with C, because I'm used to C++ Builder, which is part of the Embarcadero software package, or studio, so to speak. So you can write Delphi code, and then that will work in C++ Builder, and then you can write C code, and that will work in Delphi, and you can mix and match those, because they share the same code generator. So it's the same code that's emitted. But then jumping from that into GCC or Visual Studio, that's a steep learning curve. You have these Bible books that you have to go through first. So I'm not going to pretend to be a C++ programmer, because I'm not. But I am old enough to know that if you want to learn something, then you can learn it, but it will require time. It's scientifically proven that you have to repeat something 10,000 times or something to get it into your nervous system. So it will take time to get used to C++, for example, but it is possible. But I would have done it myself, and I would probably, based on the code that I can read, it will probably take less than a year if I'm doing it part-time. If you're doing it full-time, then, well, it depends on the person, I guess. But it's certainly not impossible. But it's extremely time-consuming.
Okay.
But once they have ported the code over, I think that maintaining it should be a lot simpler if you use, for example, Git has a lot of fantastic functions for doing changes and merging, especially the merging part. If you've worked with SVN in the past, it takes a while to get used to, for example, Git, because there's so many new functions. But the merging part and, for example, isolating a part of the code, for example, the WebKit code. Let's say somebody has gone in there and they have swapped the bit masks and stuff like that.
There is a guy that did it.
Yeah, then you can isolate that part and say, do not update this part. This has to stay the way it is. And then you do a merge. And if some of the code collides, then you can go in there and fix it up. So there's so many cool tools you can use today to, all the other code, which is, vanilla C and which will compile out of the box, will of course be updated and maintained. But I think it's possible to do it.
Good to hear. I hope that something will be better. But now it's maybe because there was the part about the languages, and let's say I would like to learn the programming or scripting.
Yeah.
And of course, probably I'm big fan of Hollywood. But you are a big fan of Pascal.
Yeah.
So let's say, which language or which way you could advise to starting from scratch to programming on Amiga OS or other system as well? Yeah. So I'm nobody. How to do and what to choose?
Well, I'm not sure about what the state is on OS 4, so I can't really say that. I know that Free Pascal has been ported, which is a great way to start, because it's Pascal as a language is very easy to understand, and there's a lot more to this story, but back in the 70s, C wasn't even a standard. Dennis Ritchie and those guys actually spent a long time forcing C into becoming a standard. But before that, the C language was actually sort of, you had 100 different toolkits that people were using to writing programs, especially for the IBM mainframes and stuff. And they managed to wrangle this into a standard, which was, the Dennis Ritchie and the Kernighan standard. But at the same time, it was still pretty Greek. It's if C is your first language, then you're going to probably spend a lot of time. You would probably be better off, starting in BASIC or something to get, the fundamental ideas, jumping and expressions and those things. Get those into the fingertips first. And this is where Pascal came in, because they needed a language that had the same capabilities as C++, which were identical in every way, except that it had to be easier to teach. And of course, if you look at some of the spaghetti C code, you can imagine teaching that. It wouldn't be easy. So they came up with Pascal, and Pascal was actually used, and it was financed by Apple for a long time. Apple Pascal, and there was also an operating system that they made in Pascal. There's actually an operating system written from scratch in Free Pascal for the Raspberry Pi. So I'm supposed to actually write some GPU drivers for them whenever I have the time. But Pascal is a very easy language to learn, and you still have the exact same way of working as you would do in C. So if I were you, I would at least have a look at it, perhaps. It might seem, and it might seem, if you just fire it up and I don't understand anything, get a book. Really, people don't seem to do that anymore. They start software and then they start stuff and they don't really understand it and then they give up. That is the typical beginner thing. I did that as well. I imagined myself as a programmer and I fell flat on my face because I had cheated. I didn't want to read the boring parts, so I jumped straight to the cool examples, and I didn't understand anything. So get a book. Buy a book like Object Pascal for Beginners or something. There's a ton of stuff and PDF books you can get. So if Pascal is not your cup of tea, and you want to learn like classical C, C++, then which is also a great, fantastic way to work. Then there's a ton of books for that as well. Get a good book on GCC, for example, and you usually get these huge Bibles.
Yeah, I imagine this. So it's 600.
Yeah, so 1,500 pages and stuff like that. But you have to remember that these books, you're not expected really to read all of it. Most of them are, if you buy a good book on the C language, then a few of the chapters will teach you about the different concepts, and then like 50% of the book will be reference material, concrete topics that you can continue to go back to whenever you're wondering about something. So it's not really that scary as people want to have it. Personally, if you're going for a classical Amiga, for example, which is actually a fantastic way to start programming, because the languages today are so complex and they cover a million different things that you can use them for. I mean, I can only imagine what it's like being 15 years today and wanting to learn programming, and you install Visual Studio and start it for the first time. I mean, there's hundreds of different projects you can start and you have no idea what it is. And so it's starting to program on the 68K, for example, get BlitzBasic. BlitzBasic is fantastic, or Amos. Very colorful and joyful way of learning the ropes. But of course, it hasn't been updated, it's not modern, so you have to be prepared to wait.
Not system friendly. This is
no, it's not system friendly, but of course, nobody cared about system friendly back in the day. I mean, for example, one of the great ways of learning to program is, making demos, for example. How do I scroll a text across the screen? How do I get, bouncing balls and bobs? What is the difference between a sprite and a bob, for example? On the Amiga, that is actually two different things. In a modern game on the PC, there are no such things. Sprites doesn't exist anymore. It's just, blitting and using the GPU. So you get to know all these concepts. But sadly, there's really no basic alternative for the PC anymore. Microsoft has sort of killed BASIC with, Visual Basic took over everything, and then they haven't really updated it yet. So it's dying out, which is really sad because BASIC is a great language. But you can actually also download BlitzBasic for free. Mark Sibley, which is one of my childhood heroes on the Amiga, together with Francois Leonet, which made Amos. He open sourced everything, so you can get BlitzBasic 2, BlitzBasic 3D, and all those old systems for the PC for free now. So you can just download them, and they work perfectly. It's they've been producing games for the Xbox and for the Windows for a long time. So that could be a great way to start, because you have that connection to the old Amiga running on your PC. So that can be good.
Okay.
On the next generation systems, I'm not sure how the menu looks like, but there is a system called AMI Blitz, which is an update of the original BlitzBasic code. I would imagine that would run on OS 4.1 or 2.
I don't know, but
yeah,
I can take a look.
Personally, I've been asked to maintain the Amiga OS 4.1 Free Pascal repository. So I've accepted that, and I will try to update it. But I need the hardware, so I have to wait until the Tabor gets out, and then I can start the backport, which is actually going to be super fun, because I have like 15 years, 20 years of Delphi projects that I can now backport to the Amiga. So I have complete invoicing systems, the image converters, everything you can imagine that I've coded over the years. And now I get a chance to port that back to the OS 4.
Nice. More software for us.
Yeah, it's a ton of software. So I'm really hoping to get my hands on that hardware soon.
Okay, I hope it will be, because Trevor said this will be, let's say, presented on the Noise or in the AmiOS, and I think this year the Tabor must be in the shops. If not, it can be too late. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I heard that there was something planned for late 2017. If that is correct or not, I'm not sure. You really have to either ask Trevor directly or look at the website. But at least that's what I've heard, that it's late this year or at the beginning, first quarter of next, that it's sort of due for that. But I know that there's a lot of boards in circulation for beta testers and people actually testing each part of the hardware and making sure that it works, and probably some guys writing drivers and stuff. So but if one of the beta testers is bored, they can send the board to me, and I can
I think it would be great.
Yeah, just send it to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's jump to Amibian, because we should talk about this, and this is over 1 hour without. So Amibian, I think most of us know this is the solution for Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
Amiga solution for Raspberry Pi emulation. And your version, or correct me if I'm wrong, is the website application, something like FriendOS. Lately you write even the article on your blog about this.
Yeah, people are a bit confused, so I figured I could try to clean it up. I actually think it made things worse, but but the intention was good. But yeah, well, Amibian, the original Amibian, I think this is important to separate those two a bit, because Gunnar and Thomas, and I believe you've interviewed those before,
yes,
are the guys behind the Amibian. Gunnar is actually sort of the guy that actually sat down and did it, and then Thomas has created some of the stuff around it, and it's a great team, and both of them are my friends, so we've been throwing ball on Amibian, and everybody's trying to pitch in with ideas and stuff. I think actually Gunnar started with, he was looking at a web page that I have, and I was super psyched because I was talking with Chips, the guy that's behind the UAE for ARM. And he showed me how I could boot this, boot into Workbench. And I was just, oh my God, yeah, cool. And I wrote about it. And then I wrote about that. Yeah, it's super cheap. And I said, yeah, that's super, because I've always wanted to do that. And I hated, those old UAE ports like EUAE and those old ones. They're really slow by today's standard. They're really slow. So you can't really take x86 Linux and expect to get WinUAE running unless you're running it through Wine or something. So this was an excellent idea. Okay, we can boot that up and just boot straight into the Workbench. Yeah, great. So I wrote about that, but I never took the time to actually realize it. I started it, but I don't know enough about Linux to, just go in there and change the boot sequence and stuff. And Gunnar didn't know this either, but he took the time to learn. So he took the idea a long time ago, and he has been continued doing this since. And then we got talking, and we became good friends. And so that's sort of the story with Amibian. Gunnar has pretty much done all the work. So he deserves that credit. He's the one that sat down and actually made a distro especially for the Amiga. So he and Thomas deserves the full credit for that. That's really great stuff. And then we were talking about websites, because Gunnar has he just took one of those those free website stuff.
I know this is.
And I said, oh my God, you have to have a better website. You can't do, and the Amiga has so much, cool graphics and stuff you can use. And you have this blue, ugly, get your act together. And he said, well, fine. Why can't you make one? Okay, sure, I'll make one. And then I took, I guess I have to talk about Smart Mobile Studio a bit as well. But I used Smart Mobile Studio, which is actually a compiler and programming language that me and some friends have made, which of course is Object Pascal, and it allows you to write free Pascal type code. And then it compiles that to JavaScript, which of course is a huge time saver, because you get to write coding classes, you get inheritance and all that stuff. But we can talk more about that later, but I use that. So I decided to use one of our demo projects, which is an embedded desktop. And that embedded desktop is originally written to run on, embedded systems. So you would fire up Linux and you will open Chromium in the full screen, and then you will simply, run your own desktop. And when you use this with touch devices, for example, let's say you're making a ticket system for the subway.
This kiosk stuff, yeah?
Yeah, kiosk type systems. That's what it's meant for. So I started out with that one, and I started building something, and I figured, okay, we need to make Gunnar's website look Amiga. So I spent a lot of time, getting the style right and stuff like that. And of course, I started with OS 4 because I thought, that looks really sexy. And then I simply had to rewrite the window management system from scratch, because the other one, or the older example that Amibian is based on, was more like, the iPad, with Windows would slide back and forth, and you had a back button and next button and stuff like that. So I removed that and rewrote the Windows system so that you can actually have, instead of full screen windows, you would have normal windows that you can resize and stuff. And before I knew it, we had a pretty good copy of the way that OS 4 could look, or you had a nice facsimile, so to speak. And then I thought, okay, let's take this one step further, and I introduced some remote disk drive code, where you actually would, for example, you can connect up to Dropbox, for example, or Google Drive or something. And then I wanted to avoid native code. It would be so easy to finish this if I used native code on the server side. I would probably be finished in 2 weeks. But I wanted something that was truly portable, that would run on Linux, Windows, Mac, that you can run on your phone. That I actually, one of the first tests I did was on my TV. So I installed everything on the TV. That was cool. So when you...
Yeah, it's a perfect place for such a OS, yeah?
Yeah, and it works. It really works. It's really great. So, but of course, the big challenge was how are we going to actually do something cool with this? Okay, you have a web-based system that looks like the Amiga, but that is kind of simple. I mean, it's CSS and it's JavaScript. That doesn't really mean anything. And then we took UAE, which has been rewritten for JavaScript. There's actually two versions. You have UAE.js, which is compiled from C code using a Clang backend compiler. So that actually emits ASM.js, which runs pretty close to native. And this is the hardest one to get working. I'm working on that one now. And then there's a handwritten version, which is the one that's in that you can try now. That also works brilliantly. You can start, disk games and load up ADF files. You can even mount hard disk images. So suddenly you could, now we can run Amiga software on it, which is just really cool. And I've hooked the browser today can now actually respond to joystick. So you can hook up a joystick with a PC and the browser can actually take control of it. And then you can pipe those signals into UAE. So you can actually sit there now with a gamepad or something and play all the Amiga games in the browser, which is...
really nice.
Yeah, it's really fun because, at least for me, I have a really small office. I have barely enough room on my desk for two keyboards. Which is a bit of a paradox because I have so many different computers that I really want to, have available. I don't have room for my Amiga.
I have the same problem.
Yeah. So right now my Amiga 1000 is in my living room, and my girlfriend is not too happy with it. So I probably have to move that down into the basement. But at least if I just want to, play some games or mess around in Blitz Basic or whatever, then I can do that in the browser. Just load it up and play around with it. And this of course brings us to the next topic when it comes to FriendOS, because a lot of people, I keep getting questions almost every week about that, and it's sort of become kind of a touchy subject, I guess, because this has never been about, some sort of competition or something. FriendOS is a much larger system, and it's the kind of system you would use to maybe create, corporate software, for example. I actually worked with them for a month, but they are C programmers, and I'm an Object Pascal developer, so it would, the learning curve for me again would be very high, very steep. Mm-hmm. I would have to study for 6 months before you become productive, and so I decided to drop that. But they have a system that is much more capable when it comes to modern day computing, and that is what they have actually set out to do, which is great. My system and what we started with was to create something for the Amiga. And it's actually a project type in Smart Mobile Studio. So if you own Smart Mobile Studio and you need a desktop, for example, for embedded applications, then that is just, new project, desktop project, boom, you have a desktop. And so we have sort of backported a part of the pieces there. But Amibian.js and the future that has is as a remote desktop system, which is capable of running Amiga code. So the end result, at least as I hope that we can finish, is something along the lines of, I guess, Arrows. Arrows is capable of running native Arrows software, but it also has, the emulation, a really good emulation layer. so that they can run 68K applications as well. And that is sort of what we're aiming at here. The other type of application is a special system which is actually divided into two parts, where half of your program would run on in the browser, and the other half would run on your server. So when you create an application for Amibian, you would write the server part and the client part. And when you install that package into Amibian on the server, it will make sure that, whenever you start that program, the client code will be transported to your browser, while the other part is installed as a service on the Node.js backend. So this is I think this is very exciting. It's an exciting time to do computing, because now you can do these things, and Node.js is turning out to be infinitely more capable than native code, because native code, it can't scale. For example, Netflix, they had the entire backend was a sort of soup of different native services. They had Java, they had C++, they had some Pascal backend stuff, and it was this giant monolith of native services. So every time something went wrong or some feature had to be tested, I think when I saw the interview with one of the developers, they talked about 45 minutes waiting for everything to compile before they can actually test something. And you can imagine working on that. You write a couple of lines of code, you hit execute, and it starts building, and then you can go have lunch and come back. That's impossible to work like that. So they decided to rewrite everything in Node.js. So they rewrite, the whole backend for Netflix is actually JavaScript now, Node.js, because that can scale, because you have, the virtual machines, and you have process managers and stuff like that. So it runs perfectly on a Raspberry Pi. But you can, if you want, let's say you want to have a server that can deal with 10,000 people at once, then you would simply scale up. Mm-hmm. And you can do this on Amazon. It's just typing in the number of instances, and then hit go.
By the power of computers or something like this.
Cloud.
Cloud. This is cloud.
Yeah. So it's super easy, and you can also have they also have process managers that will automatically scale. So you just set a maximum limit. But of course, if you have 10,000 people connecting at once, or using, in our case, the desktop, that's going to be a lot of memory, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So for me, I'm not putting this on Amazon, but I'm coding it so that people can put this on Amazon or their own home server or whatever. So Amibian.js will, of course, be free. It will also be, the source will be available, stuff like that, so they can compile it with the Smart Pascal if they want to play around with it. But it's by default, it's an Amiga system. It's for Amiga users, basically. So, and that is, of course, wildly different from FriendOS, which is made to be, a completely new system that is capable of sort of uniting different web technologies into one interface. It can, of course, do the same thing with Amibian, but to be honest, I really have no interest in it. And why should I create something that people I know make? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. So I will leave that to FriendOS, and I will focus on the Amiga part. And the hope is to make a really good desktop system for Amiga users, and try to replicate or be inspired as much as possible by OS4, so that you can have a web environment that corresponds, to the desktop environment that you have. So, so that would be good.
There are some general questions, I think, connected with this, because I can imagine that Amibian or FriendOS in this situation will be, let's say, the same. But this I can, for example, run as a terminal or something like this. Yeah, I can have the computer maybe even without operating system. Let's say boot direct to browser. Yeah, and then
I've done that already. Which is actually super simple today. I actually thought that it was going to be really hard to get this going, because you would have to, we need Chromium or a WebKit engine, or Firefox for that matter. Firefox is actually better on Linux. So I thought, this is going to be hell to code this. And I imagine using Free Pascal and SDL, something like that, and tried to set up a virtual frame buffer and basically render the HTML ourselves. Using the WebKit engine, but it turned out that there are systems available for this. You don't really need to code that much. So setting, kiosk software. I mean, there are a ton of companies working with embedded systems that, of course, use this, or have started at least to use this now. Because I can take a user case, for example. There was a company with some Delphi programmers that I know in Oslo. And they've been using native code for ages, and Delphi has a really great new framework called FireMonkey. But and this uses the GPU and stuff like that for graphics, so it's pretty snappy. But the problem is that it's very resource hungry. It requires a lot of CPU power to run the executables, and it has been x86 only. Lately, you can compile for ARM. Linux and Mac OS and stuff like that, but at the time it was very resource hungry, and they spent I think they wasted a whole year writing some kiosk software for a ticket system, and in order to run the Delphi natives, they had to have a pretty beefy, pretty powerful x86 board, which cost I think it was 2,000 something Norwegian kroners, about $200, $250 or something. And it still was underpowered. It would still lock up sometimes, especially during communication with the server. So you would click like check out an item, for example, and the button would freeze while it was talking to the server, and then it would magically. Yeah, it was, and of course, people that are on the run and going to work and stressed, they end up clicking again and again and again, and it choked the server and it caused a ton of problems. And I said, okay, why can't you use Smart Pascal instead? And JavaScript, what are you talking? Can't use JavaScript. And I said, okay, fine, I can write a test system for you. So I set up. I made a replica of their system, and I used WebSocket and Node.js on the server. And by the time we were finished, they were able to take the whole system and move it from the expensive x86 platform down to a Raspberry Pi. And they cut cost by, I think it was, I don't remember the figures right now, but I think it was $170 or something. So they saved a ton of money on doing this, because now they only needed the Raspberry Pi. They didn't even need a heatsink. They didn't need to overclock it or anything. And it booted straight into Chrome in full screen. They already had touch device screen. So everything was in order, and it worked out of the box. And the cool thing was actually the server, because WebSocket contains buffering mechanisms. So when you send a message, you don't have to think about how is it going to be delivered, in what sequence is it going to be delivered. It's not like UDP when you send packages and some of the later packages can show up first. The order is always a problem with networking on that level. But WebSocket will cache everything, and it will deliver one-on-one message. And you don't have to care about threading. JavaScript is single-threaded by default, but it has insane, it executes really fast. Mm-hmm. And the message dispatching is very safe to do, and it doesn't stress the system. It uses actually remarkably little CPU. But of course, the more stress you put on it, the more CPU. But it scales incredibly well. So the whole server and everything that they had spent so much time coding was just thrown out, and they replaced it with a Smart Mobile Studio solution instead. So that was pretty cool.
Okay, so in this let's say situation story, maybe your project or something like this can be a solution to bring the Amiga OS to Raspberry Pi, because basically Raspberry Pi can be a natural platform for crazy guys.
Thank you.
But spending $2,000 for a computer or something, and spending 20 times less, and run operating system like Amiga OS would be nice, yeah?
Yeah, of course. The problem with the Raspberry Pi is that when you start throwing large and complex code at it, then you start to realize just how low-powered it is. It runs UAE really fast because the UAE version that we use in Amibian has been specifically updated for ARM. So it has great performance for Amiga OS, the classical OS under emulation. But when you start throwing modern code at it, then you can see how slow it really is. And especially JavaScript. The test that I've done on Raspberry Pi with Amibian, it does run. There's no problem. It does run, but it's still a bit slow. It's a bit too slow for my comfort. So if you take one step up, for example, and use an Odroid, or I was hoping to use a Tinkerboard, but that turned out to be a mess. Tinkerboard isn't ready for it yet. The software, the OS, it still needs a lot of work. So I was really disappointed by the Tinkerboard. And I actually bought 2 of them. So yay! I always buy 2 boards when I'm testing, and I'm just, oh crap, that's €100 down the drain.
Yeah, but it's not so bad.
The Odroid performs really, really good. So if you throw in €10 more, then you get an Odroid, and it's so much more powerful. And that runs Amibian perfectly. Also, the UAE, of course. This is, of course, what I'm hoping to replace, because, like I mentioned, there were 2 versions of the JavaScript, and we're using the slowest version now, the handwritten one. And the reason that I picked that one was, of course, that it's so much easier to go in and change things than diving into, the UAE C code. I can read C perfectly fine, and I can also go in and do changes, but ultimately I'm not a C programmer. So I can, fix small things and add a few new features, but I'm not really that comfortable with C yet. So, but in JavaScript, it's super easy to jump in, and one of the experiments I'm doing at the moment is hijacking the I/O signals from the Amiga and remoting them. So UAE think it's reading from an ADF, for example, and then I grab the signals and then I send it to the server, and it reads the ADF there instead, and then ships back the data. I'm not sure if it's actually going to work fast enough. It does work, and of course, I/O is async by default, so there's no problem there, and then it delivers the data, but I think it's going to be too slow. I mean, every read operations for a disk and shipping that over the network. So I'm hoping to set up some sort of caching system. But the reason I tried to hijack it was, of course, to be able to introduce the file system that we have in Amibian, to introduce that on the Amiga emulation side, so that you can get access to your files on Dropbox, for example, and all those things. So you can get those. Nice. So that was the idea, but I don't think it's possible to with the code base that we have now I think we will probably have to do some changes in the C code to introduce, because there are settings for virtual devices. That's how UAE is able to, for example, if you have a folder on your PC, you can introduce that as a drive on the Amiga side.
Yep.
So that mechanism can be used. Sadly, that mechanism isn't available in the JavaScript version. You can boot off, you can actually start hard disk images, actually where you upload to Amibian, and then it will run it in memory. I actually uploaded a hard disk image at 1.2 gigabytes and booted that in memory, and it really ran fast. But of course, it's not something you want to do on a daily basis. So I need to probably go into the C code and get the virtual device in there. And then when you compile that to JavaScript, then you can hook up the device from the JavaScript side. So, yeah. So that is possible. But then you will at least be able to run Amiga stuff much more smoothly. And if you're using Workbench, then you will have a virtual device that shows up. And then you can pick one of the cloud storage devices, like the core device, of course, is the one that exposes a folder on the Node.js server, so your own files on your own server. Option, which is an option, of course. That's the main file system. And then, of course, you have Dropbox, which is super easy to connect to in JavaScript.
So you use API of Dropbox or something like this too?
Yeah. And then you just mount up. And then we have code for device drivers in Amibian that allows you to sort of abstract Amibian from whatever is actually storing the data. So it simply says, store this file data, and here's the file name, and then it's up to the driver to actually store the data somewhere. And the same also when it needs the data, give me this file, or cache this file in memory, and then I can start reading from it. And so it's the whole reading and I/O mechanisms: create folder, remove folder, enter folder, get directory listings. All of those are in the drivers that we have. And then we have to implement the middleware, so to speak, that talks to Dropbox, that talks to Google Drive, for example. All of that has to then be coded. But today that is actually super simple, because there are packages for everything. So you just download the Node.js package for Dropbox, for example, and then it's just a matter of setting up a shared Dropbox folder, getting the public key, and then you can start using it. So
it sounds good.
And it's super easy.
To be user of this, do you plan to open beta, or I don't know, because basically to use fully Amibian.js, you need the user, as I understand.
Yeah, of
when
course.
I saw the web page.
Yeah, of course. Well, we're not at beta stage yet, at least not for the complex stuff. So far, it's more like look what we can do type project. You can run UAE. You can then you have, of course, a few applications on the right side, sort of test applications. But the actual API that, for example, if you want, I've downloaded Amibian.js and I want to create my own applications for it. You need a programmer's API that is exposed that you can use. And you also need, of course, to pick an application type. If you have an application that don't need to talk to the server, then that will be super easy to code. If you need server interaction, then of course, then you need to make that program type that I talked about earlier. When half of it is on the server and half of it is, So that API has to be exposed, and right now it isn't exposed. I've actually been very good when I've been coding this, because I've been making sure that all the code is easy to expose to the programmer. And then, of course, we come to the most exciting part, at least for me, which is being able to write Amibian programs using Amibian. And this is something I've really been missing when, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think most programmers can recognize it. Like, whenever you go on vacation or someplace where you don't have a computer, you get all these fantastic ideas. It always happens. Like I was in Spain and I was sitting there on Sunday. Oh yeah, I can do like that. Oh yeah, fantastic idea. And I didn't have a computer. The only thing I had was my iPad. But you can't really code on your iPad, right? So, and that is something I really want. And I've actually started on it with the code windows. You can see that if you, for example, if you go into DH0, the hard disk, and there should be an application called Smart Cloud App.Pascal, and you will see this if you go into the website. And if you double click on that, you get sort of coder's view, which is it's a text editor called ACE, which is a coding editor for JavaScript with color coding of the commands and stuff like that. And the next step, of course, is to have property inspectors and turn this into proper programming studio, so to speak. So you will have a compile button, you will have things like that. And then you can actually write JavaScript, of course, which is built in because it's a JavaScript system. Or you can write Smart Pascal applications, which I think most people will find interesting because it's much easier to learn, and it's also much easier to write large applications in a classical programming language. So JavaScript is actually terrible when you're writing large applications. I mean, if you look at the source code, for example, for some of the text editors that you can download, there's actually a few text editors that are pretty close to OpenOffice, and they're completely written in JavaScript, and it's a mess. It's a complete mess, and they take a long time to create because of the way that JavaScript behaves. In Smart Pascal, that's just you get to work with classes, you get to have inheritance. There's a completely different way of working with the information, so it's much faster to work with.
And the program is faster as well, I think. Yeah.
It was not necessarily faster or slower. It compiles to a form of JavaScript which runs really fast, and it's optimized, of course. But it's not faster than regular JavaScript. It's like saying it's a C program faster than assembler. I mean, it's the same concept. It all bakes down to JavaScript. But the techniques is, of course, the second most important thing. The techniques you use. For example, JavaScript doesn't really have a concept of a class. It has something called prototypes. And you can do inheritance, but it's a bit fake because what you're doing is basically cloning prototypes. So what we did is that we introduced something called a VMT. And a VMT is a fundamental part of C++ and Delphi and object-oriented languages. A virtual method table is what it's called. So the code in a class, for example, is compiled once, and every object that you create in your program is simply the data, and then the data is sent into this object. So the same code operates on all the instances, including, of course, the inheritance chain. And it's a bit complex to explain all of this, but that's the way it works. So you get super fast. It really is super fast compared to some of the other stuff out there. We also beat TypeScript with this because Smart Pascal was actually created before TypeScript. And the guy that created TypeScript is Anders Heilsberg, which is was a Danish citizen. He moved to the United States, I think it was in the 80s, and he created Turbo Pascal, and then he created Delphi, and then Microsoft kidnapped him, and Now he is the chief technical officer at Microsoft. And when they released TypeScript, he was on my blog and he left a little smiley. I just bastard. But it's just friendly stuff. I mean, he still keeps tabs on the Delphi community, because I think Delphi was, the love of his life. He spent so many years writing Delphi for Borland and C++ Builder. And then he moved over to Microsoft because he didn't really have a chance. I mean, Microsoft were going after Borland, and they actually drove Borland out of business. So it was, you can join us or we can kill you, so to speak. The last thing anybody heard from him was, Bill Gates actually picked him up personally outside the Borland offices, and that was all she wrote. But I think he made quite a fortune on this. But he's still active, and he's a very sort of playful guy, and he likes to joke and stuff like that. So I was actually surprised when he's been on my blog? But we actually beat him to it when it came to the way that we do classes and interfaces and stuff like that. So that was fun.
Okay. Maybe one more question connecting with the Amibian project. You are on your own on writing this stuff, or? Yeah.
This has basically just been a hobby project for me, something I'm doing on the side. But of course, you're not really alone when you're in a sort of group, I guess you can call it. I mean, I talk with Gunnar on a daily basis and Thomas as well. And whenever I have an idea or something, then of course it's natural to ask them, what do you guys think? Or, look what I try to make. And then they will, of course, say what they mean, if they don't like it, it's shit, delete it. Or what are you doing? It looks like an Atari, you bastard. And then you get those funny guys, I
remember.
And they don't hold much back. If they don't like something, then you pretty much you get told straight up. So we have a great deal of fun there. So it's not disconnected from the Amibian native ideas, and Gunnar has been kind enough to set up some of the Linux boot stuff for Raspberry Pi. So that's how we have tested this on the Raspberry, and it worked great. I mean, you can open Windows, you can move things around, and you can all the ordinary user stuff is fast enough. But the problem is when you start the emulation. Emulating, it needs power. Emulating an Amiga system in JavaScript on $35 hardware. That's
this together sounds really good.
Yeah, it sounds great, but it's in practical terms. I mean, I'm a speed freak. I love computers that run fast. I spend a fortune on fast PCs and stuff like that. But so I really want something that really is fast. For example, the arrows that was made for Raspberry Pi, that was super fast. That's you can't, and that's of course that is because this is handwritten C code, and then it's optimized. I'm guessing they're using an LLVM optimizer or something, but it really runs like the wind, and you can't expect to get that type of performance from a GS system. You can get pretty close to native, but it won't be native. The benefit of a JavaScript system is that it's portable. Platform is not an issue. You can run this on your TV, you can run it on your phone, you can run it. It doesn't matter as long as you have a modern browser.
And
that brings us back to the browser. So that was sort of the paradox here. That it looks like the Amiga, Amiga OS 4.1, but you can't use Amiga 4.1 to look at it. That would sort of be the paradox. But I think there is work being done on the browser part for Amiga OS, so that should be okay in a while.
Okay, so maybe because let's say I have idea. Let's call it Amiga OS 5. maybe it should be better because based even on Arrows Broadway or something like that, to base like Apple did it, the whole system on Linux kernel and make the Amiga feeling through the GUI and this stuff. Yeah. What do you think about this? Because for most of Amiga guy, first use, for example, Intel is oh my god, and drop the Amiga kernel, and it's I can be killed now. Yeah?
No, but I agree. I actually agree. I mean, this is a natural thought, and it's why. What's the point of reinventing the wheel? You're not going to catch up with Linus Torvalds when it comes to writing kernels. The guy has been doing this for 20 years now, 15 years?
More,
You're not going to compete with that. And there's no point in competition because it's a free product. I have no idea how he's getting paid, but he is getting paid. And he spent every day of his life coding, a kernel. So he's good at that. So, okay, let him do that. And when it comes to the rest of Linux, I'm not a big Linux guy, but I have started to learn about Linux and the way that it's organized. And I've actually seen Linux distributions that is as small as 20 megabytes. 20 megabytes, and that gives you the kernel. It gives you the subsystem of drivers, the most fundamental drivers that will make it work on at least the average PC, unless you have something very peculiar or brand new or something that isn't supported, and that's great. We can actually have, if somebody took the time, you can actually start with that. 15 or 20 megabytes. Fine, that's the foundation, and that gives you a foundation to build something on top of that. You would probably need a few more packages to make sure that you are connected to the driver database. And I would hope that you would probably like to have Aperture or some of the package systems available. But you don't need to install X or those large systems. You don't need that. Just leave that be, and fine. Then you can go into native coding. Or actually, you can actually save time by having X there. You don't have to deal with all the frame buffer stuff and all that. But then you can take over, shaping the desktop and making it look Amiga. And you can do like Android did. Android is basically Linux. They have done this. I mean, Android is now probably the most installed operating system for mobile devices in the world. And it's Linux. It builds on the kernel and a small subsystem of Linux, and then you have a secondary layer of drivers and interfaces, and then you have Java. But of course, Java was kicked out. Java was actually kicked out quite fast there, because Java bytecodes turned out to be ridiculous. It's the proverbial rape of the stack.
I think it was in Android 2, or something. Yeah, and then it's much better,
Yeah, and then they switched to native compiling. But if you look at how Android is built up, that's the way to go. And I think I'm actually surprised that the Amiga community haven't done this before, or at least after Android came out. Or I've been thinking about this for years. But it's still a pretty large task to do. I mean, you have to create a window manager, connect that to tasks. You have to deal with threading.
But it's easier than from scratch,
Yeah, because most of this is taken care of, or at least there's a foundation for it in the kernel and stuff like that. You don't have to manually sit there and mess around with the tasks so much. You still have to hook up to the system, and I mean the desktop has to know what processes are running, right? And there has to be a communication layer between the different processes and the desktop, as well as very fast message systems. They have to talk to each other. But it's not magic. I mean, it's not like magic to create this. A couple of good C programmers should be able to do this.
Okay, but first.
So I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think most of our community will not agree about this. I think because you will get, I don't know, basically I don't know what our community want to achieve, maybe survive, but because this is connected, the current situation, the classic is really popular, and really Vampire, for example, is really cool. We can talk about this as well. But then you have FreeNG system fighting each other because there is like this, or was like this, and basically it's bad because I have the feeling that the whole problem for the, let's say, Amiga in general, the new Amiga, is that from the, let's say, 2000, it was the fight between camps, and now really classic is popular, and nobody is care about this. I think technology, just more super frogs say.
Yeah. Well,
so when you bring them system based on Linux,
but I have to be perfectly honest. I have never understood, this sort of purist tendencies that is in the Amiga, and I know we all have them. I mean, it's like my reaction to Atari, right? It's sort of programmed into you because you have been programmed by the Commodore machinery for so many years in your childhood that it's probably stuck in your nervous system. But I have never understood the purist because the Amiga is separated from today's reality by so many years that you can't have a linear evolution. It's for example, from what I've heard of the interviews with some of the guys that worked at Commodore, they were one of the last things they were working on was the AAA system, which was supposed to be kind of like the PlayStation 1 or something, in terms of
and this homebrew project,
Yeah, I'm not really. I haven't really got stuck into it, but I think those names have turned up. If that is AAA or homebrew, I'm not sure, but I know that they were working.
Homebrew most. So that break compatibility. This was like this,
So that was actually the last thing they were doing. Were creating a system that would completely break with the 68K. So the whole fight that 68K is the only Amiga and we need to have a linear evolution. No, you can't have that. You can't have that anymore because it's separated with almost 2 decades. It's rubbish. And even if Commodore had survived, they would have broken compatibility and gone for PowerPC, just like Apple did. And one of the reasons why they would have done that was also because of chip prices. They followed Apple, and they would follow Apple because it made financial sense. Apple was huge, and they pushed chip prices down, so it makes sense to follow them and sort of piggyback on their success. And I think that the Commodore today, if they had survived, it would have been x86. And then, of course, you get to the point, Apple actually gave up on creating an operating system. That's why they switched, because the old system couldn't be salvaged. It was sort of potpourri.
It was overpatched.
It was just a huge mess, and the only way that they could save this was to rewrite it from scratch, and they didn't have time for that. So what they did, okay, fine, let's piggyback on something that is stable, that is, of course, doesn't cost us anything, that we have full control over, blah, blah, blah. And you can save years of development, right? And that was Unix for them. So they took Unix and then they created Darwin on top of that, which is what people think is Apple. And then they simply branded it as, System X. And why can't somebody else do the same thing? It's ridiculous. Sit there and spend. You're gonna handwrite a kernel. It's rubbish. And the 68K, you can order a couple of them now, I think, but in a couple of years it will be empty. There won't be any 68 that you can order anymore. You can order them in their hundreds, I think, from Asia. So they're still being produced. I think Samsung uses them in some dishwashers or something. No, it's true. It's true. I actually had a dishwasher with a 68K in it. I was standing there. Oh my God! It's cool.
Put Boeing on this.
Get Boeing. Washing and stuff. But it's almost an insult. Reduced to a washing machine.
But many of us will say that you have FPGA, so Vampire, which is great project. But I think this is the great project for the people that in 90s have an opportunity to use powerful Amiga, like 4000 with 060 or something. So compare to standard Amiga is amazing, but basically it's putting nothing new in the classic Amiga because you cannot put nothing new there. Yeah.
The only way you can actually put something new into the classic Amiga is if somebody went into the operating system source code and started to evolve it from within and sort of bring it up to speed. But of course, that's where OS 4.1 is. So it's like I said before, I don't understand what they're actually doing there. But the FPGA system, I'm actually really love that. But of course, for me, the Amiga isn't really the games. I used to play a lot of games, of course, but for me, the magic of the Amiga was the operating system. Because I spent most of my time on the desktop programming. And of course, the programming tools were all, desktop friendly.
Yeah.
Most of the programs I made were desktop friendly, apart from, the games and demos. So
I have the same because I was mainly working on Amiga somehow. Maybe not fully legal because I was too young to work, but I was making some graphic. So it was system friendly, and I played quite a lot. But then I passed this period, and that's why really I'm amazed by Vampire because it's good price, graphic board inside, cool. Yeah, but
I think that. Yeah, so sorry. I think the frustration, at least, hopefully, I'm not the only one. But I think that the frustration with the classic Amiga OS is that it's so good. I can start up FS-UAE and I have a perfectly set up Amiga and stuff like that, and a cool background, and it's so good. But it falls a little bit short. You can almost start doing modern programming in it, but just almost, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's an old system, and you start missing some of the modern features, and I think that causes a lot of frustration. At least it does for me, because I love the Amiga, and I see this Workbench, and it doesn't really require that much work to be up to date, but nobody's doing it, right?
Yep.
And this is why I have absolutely no problem, for example, if the Amiga was running on an x86, or if Amiga OS was ported to ARM, for example. It would mean nothing to me, because to me the Amiga is the desktop, and everything else, all the old games and the things that we grew up with. You will always have that, and it will always be there in either through emulation, or if you have an old Amiga and buy a Vampire, then you will have this, this super Amiga, a classical, that is compatible and stuff like that. It is okay. Let's move on. I mean, let's build something. Let's take all the good stuff that we remember and try to implement that in a new way and make it survive. The only way to make it survive isn't to make it exclusive and sell Amiga parts for $500 when they cost $25 to begin with. The collector stuff and the
collector edition.
The scavengers on eBay and stuff like that. That is actually killing it. That is slowly eroding away, because you might love the Amiga, but if you can't afford to actually get one, I mean, then you only have one way to go, and that is emulation. So why not embrace that and say, okay, fine, we need something new. And the FPGA can deliver that, but I think that for my personal taste, I would actually like something that's a bit faster. I don't know enough about FPGA to do anything but make assumptions, but I would assume that some of the more expensive models will actually have better performance. Yes, I know all about the gates, and some say you can't change the performance, you have to change the way the gates or the way your architecture is. But it has been said by a few of those that work on FPGAs that yes, you can buy more expensive models, and the metal in the gates or whatever is different, more costly, and they respond faster or something. I don't know, but I would assume that a system that costs $4,500 has better performance than something that costs $400. I would have some assumption there. So surely, if somebody took Amiga OS, not the classical, but the modern one that you can actually work on, and stuff that in an FPGA, then sure, why not? I would buy that if it was in a reasonable price range, $400 or $1,000 or something for a power version, then sure. But I would also buy a high-end emulated system, as long as it ran, as long as you can do some sort of work on it, you can actually use it for something practical. And so I'm actually hoping that maybe Trevor would consider, for example, an x86 version, because if the OS becomes popular, and there are many things about Amiga OS that would make it popular, ease of use, it's the way some things work, the file system, how it's organized. It's a lot easier, for example, to learn how Amiga OS operates than, for example, Linux. If you don't know anything about Linux and you look at the way the folders are organized, you have no clue what goes where.
Yeah, and they are changing this as well. So.
Yeah. And if you look at the Amiga and you look at the folders, devs, okay, I would guess that is device drivers, and then you can do a fair bit of guessing. It's intuitive to work with, and that alone is something that I think can help it. And the friendly look and the way things work, it's a great operating system. And I think that had this been spread, had we gotten this for x86, of course a ton of Amiga guys would have switched to it, or at least installed it. And if they then started to bring over some heavy software so that you can actually work on this, OpenOffice, all the browsers, port over a lot of stuff from Linux. A lot of cool stuff is on Linux. For example, some of the programming editors, for example, that are there, Eclipse, get all of those over so that you can do those, so that you can actually use it to work. And then you can take all of that and, of course, create Amiga-specific applications.
Yep.
Give people an incentive to buy the Amiga OS. I think that would be a much more successful way to go. But we will see. I mean, if the Taboola is a hit whenever it comes out, and maybe that will work as well.
Let's have a hope. I think basically when we would completely migrate current Amiga OS, or like Morpheus theoretically is doing this, and they switch to AMD processor, but I have the feeling, because the quantity of developers, I think maybe the system can be ported, but software, nobody will port. Basically, when you take a look what is, let's say, on IMNet, which version that abandoned software that nobody will port it, or you know what I mean. Yeah, so I don't see this.
Well, it depends on porting old software. I don't know if is it any point. I mean, it depends, of course. I mean, take, Sound Tracker and Pro Tracker and those applications, those have already been ported to different systems. You even have a JavaScript version for it. So I actually have Pro Tracker running in Amibian. So is it porting those applications? I mean, how can I explain it? I guess you have to find people that have a passion for it, Nobody's going to port Blitz Basic, for example, unless you really love it,
Yep.
And the same also with the Pro Tracker and Lightwave or whatever. It has to be something that you really love to work with, and that you want to get over to that platform. And that is something that the Amiga community has an abundance of. I don't think I have at least never seen a community that has so much passion for a computer ever. And I've been doing programming now since I was a kid, and I've developed for many different systems over the years. And I've never seen something like, the Amiga. People, grown-up men that actually get upset, physically upset over a platform, for example. That's quite unique. So I would think that actually we have the resources to do this, but there has to be a consensus. Right now, there's too many opinions running around, and
so we need the guy that can.
Yeah, we need somebody. We need somebody who can. First create a platform, and then getting developers interested, I think should be easy if they do it the right way. You have to make it available. For example, I couldn't do much with for example, Arrows until Free Pascal was ported. I could, sit and play around and see, but you have to remember that some of these high-level languages or medium-level languages are extremely productive. You can do things in 1,000 lines of code that would take you maybe 7,000 lines of code in another language. So that's the first thing they need to get over. They have to get the development tools available and not play favoritism. If all you know is C++, then you can't be arrogant about it, we're only going to use C in this system. Because most of the applications in the world are actually not programmed in C. They're programmed in every other language. For example, we noticed this when after Microsoft killed off Borland, it turned out that I think it was something like 1/3 of the Windows portfolio was actually written in Delphi. Delphi and C++ builder, so they shot themselves in the leg. And so building a community for OS4, for example, they have to get they have to forget, of course now it's too late, they need to focus on the browser now, but the first thing I would do was, okay, let's leave everything alone and get the development tools over. Spend 6 months porting the open source Blitz Basic sources, for example. Get that over, because there are so many people who are playing around with Blitz Basic, and also a lot of kids. You need something that kids can use. Something that, if I buy an Amiga, then it's so easy to create games that all the indie developers get interested, Mm-hmm. And get, Free Pascal and all those type languages over as well, because those are extremely productive to create business application, desktop applications. So you get, the huge productive side. And of course, cater to the C++ developers who do, the core development of the operating system and low-level drivers and stuff like that. But you have to get the developers interested. Otherwise, and that's I think is where they haven't paid too much attention. Yeah. I really hope that they take a time out and say, okay, what do we need to build critical mass? And they need to get developers over. But Morpheus as well has sort of failed in that department. Arrows has been better. They've, I think one of the first systems that they took over was Free Pascal. So the first, and this is sort of typical as well for different Linux distros. First you get GCC, then you get Free Pascal, and then all the other systems come, like Node.js systems like that. But yeah, get that over, and also think about the fact that kids today, they grow up with, JavaScript, for example. So the V8 JavaScript engine, that's like $400K or something. It's very small.
I heard about this.
Just the JavaScript engine is very small. It shouldn't really be that hard porting that over and integrating JavaScript, for example, into the OS so that people can write extensions in JavaScript as well. I mean, you have now millions of kids that are really good JavaScript programmers. They don't know anything else. But if you get them to come over to the system and recognize that, on this system I can do something really cool with the skill that I have, I think that would also be very important. Okay. Because you see that with, for example, FriendOS as well. The only real language that they have is, of course, JavaScript. And then they can build other languages on top of that. But and that is something that they have as a very good selling point, that if you know JavaScript, you can create applications, which is really great. And it's the same also with Amibian. If you know JavaScript, then you can create applications. But we're also going to put in, open or free Pascal, and we also have a bytecode engine, which allows us to implement things like BitsBasic and AmosBasic and stuff like that. But I think that is the first thing you have to do. Otherwise, you won't be able to build up, a critical mass of developers. You have to get the developers in there.
Okay, so this is...
Otherwise, it won't work.
Okay, yeah, because it looks like it's not working, and I think what you are talking is you have a lot of rights. So connecting this, let's say, two things, it looks like there is no plan what to do with, say, Amiga systems or whatever.
Well, I think there are many plans that are colliding. The plan that I have liked the most, to be perfectly honest, is the one that Trevor has, because he is backing it up with action. He is backing it up with the money that he has invested in this, and he's creating physical hardware. So you have actually something tangible to deal with. And once you get the hardware, then of course the software part comes in, and I think he tried to time it. I'm not sure. I think it has probably been a few problems he has to solve along the way. But he is doing the only thing that is reasonable if you want a new hardware platform. And something that is, for example, a Tabor is something that is fairly cheap, $400, something around that, for a computer system. It is reasonable. It is has a good operating system, etc. And the only thing that is missing, in my view, is the programming tools. Right now, they only have GCC. There's also a test version of Free Pascal, the one that I'm hopefully taking over after a while. But they need to get more stuff in there. And create bundles, the developer bundle, graphics bundle, for example. I could probably code a copy of dpaint in 14 days or something, because it's so simple. Get those applications in there, make sure that people can get creative.
Basically, this is music. What Apple was doing.
Yeah,
they make it like that you think that you are creative, maybe like
but Apple, they have this this image. Think different, but in the end, they are more similar than anybody else. Apple is. I'm not too keen on the Apple system, but at least not as a developer, because once you get boxed into the developer system there, and all the certificates and the sort of boxed in control that Apple have over you, it's not something I enjoy. So I actually stopped making software for Apple for a while. But the idea that you actually have a computer where you can be creative, that is basically what I love about the Amiga. That it was so easy to do stuff.
Yeah, basically this was why we are so good now, because the Amiga was creative platform.
Yeah, you could do so much stuff, and there was, you had 3 or 4 different paint applications if you want to work with graphics. You had even assemblers. I mean, you have 3 or 4 different assemblers. I only remember 2 of them right now, but there were different things you could do, and you had the whole spectrum of languages from assembler all the way up to I think Modula. Modular 2 or something, which was probably where it ended for the classical Amigas. And then, of course, C++ came along, late 80s, starting of the 90s. You had SAS, C++.
Yep.
And then you had, I think I actually have one here, and that is Storm. Yeah, Storm C++. Yeah. And so you had, they started on the objective or the object-oriented languages, and then it sort of died out. But you could do anything. Even if all you had was Amiga Basic, you can still create some pretty awesome stuff. I actually know a guy in Finland who created his entire business using Amiga Basic. And it was a school system. It was a sort of a grade system for all the pupils in the school. And they started on an Amiga 500 in Amiga Basic. And they sold this product to pretty much every school in Finland. And then they moved it to the PC, and it was rewritten in Pascal. First in Turbo Pascal, and then later in Delphi. And now it has been rewritten in Smart Pascal, which is the product I made. So it has the whole the whole evolution. But the point is that on the Amiga you can do all these things. And when I sit down with OS 4.1 today, it's something that is missing. It's you have to buy the extra bonus pack. Oh, great. You get into that whole there should be some sort of creativity out of the box. You can download, of course, the SDK and the developer tools, but those are low level.
It should be like it looks like I'm a big fan of Apple in this situation, but I would copy them in many things, and I would copy them as well with the let's say software side. So after that, I bought the X5000 that I had pre-installed system, but in funny way. Yeah, so reformat and do it on your own. But it should be done out of box. I have the system, I have the browser, I have the music program, video editor, and like Apple do it. I don't know nothing, power on, everything,
Yeah, it should be, or at least it should be available very easily. Like, for example, the first time you start this up,
check mark what you would want.
What do you want to download now? You want productivity software? Would you like office software? Would you like blah, blah, blah? But of course, I can understand, those that made the operating system, that this has been a work of passion for them, I can imagine. They spent quite a long time doing it.
Yep.
And writing an operating system is huge. It's probably one of the most complex things you can do as a programmer. That and writing compilers, for example, it's a recursive nightmare, so to speak. So getting that right is a huge achievement. But of course, if you don't have millions in the bank, you don't have the resources to take it one step further, then I think they felt like, okay, we have created the operating system, we have done our part, this has been a marathon, and then give that to the Amiga community. And I actually think that OS4 should be praised. I mean, it looks fantastic. It has a lot of modern features, and I can imagine if they have retained some of the old architecture, like intuition and the way that you used to sort of interact with the operating system in your code. The Amiga OS was an excellent platform to work on. It was great. It was very easy to program stuff, doing some of the more complex things that is a nightmare to do on Windows, for example, if you're doing low-level stuff, message ports and everything. That was so easy to do on the Amiga, and I think that they will score a lot of points there. But they really need to get, productivity software, if not free, at least a light version or something that they can ship with the operating system or that is available. And like you say, the standard things that you need, the browser, that should be the first thing, or after programming languages, get a good browser in there. That should have been there ages ago. I was actually surprised to learn that wasn't in the package. So I said, what? They're still using it. Oh. Also, somebody was using a web or something.
But basically there's a eyebrows, but you must install it from extras. So it's not standard installed, I think. Yes. So first mistake somehow, or misunderstood. And this eyebrows is working like Edge in Windows now. So basically everybody used it to download the Firefox, and eyebrows is used to download Odyssey.
Yeah, I actually have a browser that I could port over. It's not WebKit. It's actually something that is coded in Object Pascal. I have it running on Free Pascal actually. The only thing that is time consuming, and that would probably take a while to implement, that is the JavaScript side. So I hooked it up with the V8 engine, but of course you have to expose all the objects. In JavaScript you have objects like window, for example. So that has to be defined in the JavaScript engine and then exposed to the script. But I have the rendering engine actually to render WebKit. So and it's completely portable. It compiles under Free Pascal and Delphi, and it's really fast. So it's pretty good. I didn't write all of it, so I can't take full credit for it. It's actually a product for Delphi. If you don't want to, bundle, if you don't want to use Internet Explorer to display HTML, if you don't want to use Chromium embedded or some sort of WebKit thing or Firefox, then you can embed, this is a component. So it's ported over easy.
I was thinking even that maybe something like this, for example, could be released one time in year and sold for small point of, money, 20 euros in year. And maybe this will encourage somebody to do it, because let's say, I hope the community will buy it, because after the Dropbox for Amiga that made the Norbert, and almost nobody bought it, I'm really afraid that this community is really interested only in nostalgia.
I think there's both ways, but I also think that the days of public domain is over, so to speak. Not public domain, but the idea that you buy shareware, I guess, is what it was called. I think those days are over because people are so used to open source now that it should be some things they are so used to things being free. For example, a browser. So the idea of paying $20 for, even if it's the only browser you can get, sort of make people I'm not going to pay for that. It should be free. And I think that is sort of infested. It has killed off the shareware market to some extent. Except there's plenty of indie games and things like that are still kind of shareware, but today we use backers instead.
True.
Backers, so they make money. So, but for my personal, I wouldn't really take any money off it. So one of the first thing I'm going to port over is, of course, the HTML rendering engine. Probably also the JavaScript engine, but I have no hardware, so I can't do it. So the moment I get my hands on a Tabor or something, then I can start porting over stuff. And also an IDE for a better IDE for Free Pascal, because Lazarus is ancient, so we need something a bit more modern. And then you can start looking at OpenOffice, for example, just to take that as an example. You have OpenOffice packages that have also been written in Object Pascal, which are free. So getting good software, porting it back from the PC now is, I'm sitting here with a ton of software that could easily be ported over. But the infrastructure isn't there, like we've been talking about, it doesn't exist.
I start to understand why for Amiga OS, basically this Firefox port, the Timberwolf. Now LibreOffice is born in such a pain, and it takes 5 years because like I said, I'm a developer, noob in the developer's world or something like that. So now I understand we don't have the tools to do it fast.
There's something about the tools. Of course, you have the basic C++ compiler, right? GCC is there, and that's a huge tool chain with a lot of different tools. But look at Visual Studio, for example. It's so easy to use. You just fire it up, and you have a ton of wizards and stuff, and you can put together software really fast. And it's the same with Delphi. You fire it up, you have 10,000 different projects you can make. So they need to get something like that over. A good IDE, make it easy to create programs, plenty of wizards for porting over code and stuff like that. And then you will see programs appearing. But they also have to get away from the C++ church, so to speak. We only do C++, because that's not what people use today to write programs. Even 20 years back, it was, Pascal was there, and a ton of other languages that have evolved side by side with C++. And people use that for productivity. And I think today on Windows and Mac, pure C++ applications are, that's a small percentage of the applications that you can buy. Most of them are written in other languages. So they need to get those tools into there. Even Java, I can stand Java, but even Java has to be there. Because I would like to say that this Java idea I really like. I'm maybe not so big fan of Java because I meet Java in my work, and this is heavy applications, and this is so fucking slow. But basically, first, like you said, this can be easy to young people to do something. Yeah.
But I think maybe this can open business market for this because of the, let's say, this industry 4.0 that everything goes to internet, cloud, the factories are automated. And basically in companies, it's a lot of things based on Java because it's easy to do, I think. Java is sort of going down now. It's the evolution that most products have. They build up, and then they become super popular, and then it slowly goes down again. Down to a normal level of users. And it's the same with C# as well. That is enjoying sort of the limelight now, and then it will start to fade down again until something else comes along. But Java is remarkably used still, even after all the problems that have been there. It's not really welcome anymore on mobile devices because the way that it uses the stack and the way that it uses the garbage collection, it causes CPU spikes. So you can't really, suddenly you get a spike and the device will lock up, or you drain your battery, for example, very quickly. I think this is Android 2.0. I remember this.
But it's also happens on servers, and it's been a huge mess. Banks, at least in Scandinavia, has kicked them out because it's been unreliable. But if we look away from that and say, okay, there's a lot of Java developers out there who, and we could use their competence. They might be Java programmers, but they're still good developers. Yeah. And you need to get those developers. Even if you can't stand Java, you have to include them. It's like democracy. You can't exclude people you don't like. You have to include them, even though you might not share their opinions. And C# as well. The mono runtime system is actually very small. There's a small core library that's written in C. And then the rest of C# is actually written in C#. So once you port over, the foundation stone, so to speak, then the rest of the house follows. So they should spend a lot more time getting those things over. At least C#, Java, and free Pascal. If they have those three, and also perhaps get a good IDE like Eclipse, for example, port that over, or hopefully maybe something better, or at least code blocks. Something that is easy to use. Get that over and link them up so that you can use different languages. Make it super easy for people to create Amiga programs. Then things will definitely change. Because then you get Java developers, and at first they might insist on using Java, but sooner or later they will be tempted. Oh yeah, maybe C++ is the way to go, or hey, we can port this to free Pascal, and then you get all those cool ports over, and you get people interested. And but right now the first language I would say is get free Pascal, because there are millions of users around the world, and it's an excellent language to learn. But equally important is JavaScript. That should be system-wide. If I was to pick a single system to port over now, it will probably be JavaScript, Node.js. Get Node.js into the system. That is actually a lot more important than Python, for example.
Python is script language, typical, yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's a great scripting language, and it's fantastic to do automation with. It's a super scripting engine. But right now, if you're going to capitalize on what is happening, with cloud and general application making, get JavaScript and get it into the system. Get it into shell, so you don't have it as an sort of external.
Understand.
Bolt it into the system, and also, of course, the ability to write extension and commodities for the desktop using JavaScript, for example. And it should perhaps replace parts of a regex, or at least be molded together with it, so that you have the automation side, but also the ability to easily create cool stuff.
Again, this is like Apple script, I think is doing.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. But if you Google JavaScript, and you can Google anything, JavaScript clock, JavaScript rotating something, you will find 1,000 different. It's so easy to find JavaScript code that does something. Mm-hmm. And if you have this bolted into the system, you can then leverage all of that. You can go out there and find a small snippet that does something, and you can include that. And build up very quickly.
And I think this is as well interesting, because let's say when I write the game on the JavaScript, I can sell it on Amiga OS and on the other platforms. Yeah, so I'm not. So you get the games over, and once you get people wanting to write games, like I said, the V8 engine is very small. If you rip out all the browser stuff and just look at the JavaScript engine, it's very small. It's extremely tight code, but it should be portable within a very reasonable amount of time. And then you can expose objects, and then you can, for example, for Amiga, hook up JavaScript with some of the hardware accelerated stuff that is available in the operating system, so that JavaScript games will run 10 times faster on the Amiga than it would do on a bog standard PC or something. Make it exciting. And if they bolt this into the system, they would have a winning formula, I think, because JavaScript will then be a natural part of the system, and you can do so much with it. And then, of course, it is a natural evolution to go interact with cloud services, for example. Imagine if you could actually sit down with a simple editor and write the driver that talks to Dropbox, for example. You wouldn't need external drivers for
REST services and online services. You can actually write them in JavaScript, and then you can mount them up when the OS starts. You know, you don't need native code to talk to a REST service on the other side of the planet, or a SOAP service, or a WebSocket, or something like that. All of this can now be done in JavaScript, and that would actually save Amiga OS and the guys that's working on the API. It would save them a lot of time, because you wouldn't have to have a specialist working for them, right?
Yep.
If you have a clean API for calling up REST services, for example, then the average JavaScript programmer can do this for you. You can take, a good JavaScript programmer will be able to write drivers to interact with, I think there's like 50 different storage services, cloud services. I actually implemented a driver I was using Pascal for Amiga Classical last weekend. So I ported over, there's a Delphi package called TMS Cloud Package, which has roughly 50, I think, cloud drivers. And I was bored, so I figured, okay, let's see if we can make this work on the Amiga. And Pascal aced it. So with a small bit of work, you can actually now mount up all of those different services on the classic 68. But if you had similar functionality, we're just talking about REST functionality, calling web services, simple Node.js WebSockets. I mean, this isn't black magic. If you had that built into Amiga OS, then you wouldn't need Pascal. You wouldn't need C++ to do those things. And then, of course, you need a mounting system so these things can be mounted, and voila, you can have cloud storage that anybody can update. So, yeah.
I think the Trevor should listen this episode. Just copy-paste ideas.
I've talked to Trevor about this before, and I understand his position, because, I mean, there are tons of stuff that you don't see when you're not, working at a company, for example. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of factors you have to calculate for that. Of course, when you have an idea like I presented now, you don't have to care about the details. But he was very positive to those kind of things. But before that can happen, there's a ton of stuff that has to be in place. So from a business point of view,
about this JavaScript, there is the Qt port for something on Amiga OS 4, and let's say it works like this. Is somehow integrated, not maybe fully, but still is 5 years old again.
Yeah.
But thanks to this, you can have some application from Qt. Yeah. So it's but it's not official.
I know that Qt has a JavaScript engine. I'm not sure. I haven't studied it, but I know they have like web views, and that is actually a good point. That there's a lot of people working in the Qt or Qt or however you pronounce it environment now that are writing hybrid applications only. So most of the work is done in JavaScript, and then you just have a native sort of bootstrap that starts the system. So I guess maybe Qt is a good example on how you can build an infrastructure, develop an infrastructure where you can do native development, but you can also save a lot of time by using a JIT compiled system like JavaScript. But it has to be maintained. 5 years old. That's ancient in terms of development there. So
I know this is the biggest problem, but I think maybe we should start to finish, because it's almost 3 hours.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And I think we can continue more, but the audience can die between. But let's say something like last question: the future of operating system, it will be more. I think it will be more like Amibian, your work, or FriendUP, not your work.
Yeah.
So cloud-based web system, and again, Apple shows that they're going in this direction, probably. So do you think this happens like this? Because basically now nobody cares in which operating system you are working. The application or apps are important, yeah?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that native is ever going to disappear, because that is sort of the nature of computing. You can't get away from the fact that there is a CPU that's going to run this code. But I think that it will. Native programming is probably going to go a bit in the background. It used to be, native programming used to be sort of something that engineers did. And then suddenly it became something that everybody could do, with the Amiga and Commodore 64. Suddenly the whole world of engineering was, available to everyone. And I think maybe that the companies now are actually deliberately trying to separate the engineers from the hobbyists, so to speak. For example, Java and .NET isn't as portable as people would hope for. For example, when Microsoft say that .NET supports many different operating systems, they're not talking about other operating systems. They're talking about different versions of Windows. Yeah, so it's a bit sneaky. But if you can get millions of users to only know bytecode, they don't know assembler if their life depended on it, then you create a dependency system where the guys that know real programming will, of course, have an exclusive situation or position. So they have been working a lot on that system, and Microsoft's ultimate game plan, and they have been open about this since the beginning, is renting software. So that is why they were so desperate to get Java, and later they created .NET. It has to do with their renting ideas and models, and you see this already today with Office 365, for example. That you have a license, you pay for services 1 year ahead, right?
The same Adobe and so on.
Yeah. But it's basically what you're doing is renting it, because the moment your license expires, you lose access to everything, right? And that is a renting model, and they've been working very hard to realize that. When it comes to operating systems in the future, I think that you're never going to get away from native, but I think it will be more in the background. I think that you will have standard modules, like Linux, for example. You can cherry pick the modules you need to have as a foundation. And then I think the concept of desktop is going to become more specific. For example, Netflix, for example, can also be seen as a type of desktop, right? Where you work with movies and browsing around a menu is basically what you do. It's the same you see also in game emulation systems. Every game emulation system suddenly looks like Sony PlayStation, where you can go back and forth and pick the game you want, if it's MAME or whatever, and cool background graphics and stuff like that. So I think that you're going to see a lot of specifics where you have, the same foundation, but you have different adaptations of the top. And this is something that I think, FriendOS can do a lot of good there, because they can adapt, for example, to, let's say you have a company, right? A large company, and the people that work there are going to have a specific amount of applications to work with. Access to company mail, access to a browser, productivity software that you use maybe to write letters and write documentation and stuff like that. Then you can sort of tailor a desktop, just like you would do, for example, with Windows today, with large, Citrix mainframes and stuff. But it would, of course, be a lot cheaper if they could all run, JavaScript and basically exist in the cloud. That would be a lot more cost effective. But I think that operating systems, the way that we know them today, I don't think they're going to disappear, but they're going to fade into the background. And you will see a lot of hybrid systems where, the desktop is written in a virtual language of sorts, be it Java, JavaScript, or C# or something. And then the native part is going to, over the next 20 years, go back to being an engineer discipline. But that's my personal view on it. But I might be completely wrong, of course. I get the sense that is what happened. You're getting a sort of separation between the hobby developer and the real developer, so to speak.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Okay, so do I have to ask you something more, or I of course, but but I think we should finish slowly. So maybe the best the best game of Amiga, it's maybe Super Frog because it's most popular.
Well, not for me. I'm a Dune guy. Dune 2.
Okay.
I think I spent more time than anything on Dune. And the game that I'm actually really eager to try now is Rocket Ranger. Okay. That was the first game that I actually bought, that I paid money for. One of the few games I paid money for, Rocket Ranger. And I haven't played that since I was a kid. And I have it available, of course, in FS-UAE, but I've deliberately not played it. So when I bought the Amiga 1000, and I'm just waiting for a scan doubler now, so I can get the monitor going. And then that's going to be the thing I'm going to try, because I have so fond memories of it. Other than that, I really loved Supercars. Supercars was really fun. But when I tried that as an adult, I was just like, oh, it sucks. Because you remember it as, wow, look at the cars, they run so fast, and there was so much action, and now it's just...
Yeah,
so it was a bit
basically... 2 weeks ago or 3, the guy asked me, I make some movie for YouTube with Amiga shooters, 3D, Gloom and so on. And I remember it amazing, especially Breathless or something like high level. And you run this on emulation or on modern LCD, you know what I mean? Yeah. And the pixels are big like a cow. And how you can play it,
I remember that as well. I was so disappointed because I was running, I think it was one of the first, Doom clones, Gloom, I think it was.
Yeah, Gloom.
Yeah, and I had an Amiga 1200 and it's a 6830 processor or something. I seem to remember it's a long time ago. And I was expecting, now we have, the PC gamers, shut up. And then I started and I was like, oh my God, it was a tiny, tiny window with some poor 3D graphics. And a friend of mine had, I think it was a 386 or 486 PC, and he was running, full screen. And I was like, oh man, that was cool. But if I get a Vampire, I hear that you can run it full screen now. So 20 years later.
This is Vampire is really, really nice. This is, if you don't have, you should try to buy. Try to buy.
I'm waiting. I sent one of those emails, but I haven't heard anything yet. So it's, but I'm hoping to get one for the Amiga 1000. I hear that you can use the 500 version for that, and but I also have an Amiga 600 that I would really like to have a version for. So hopefully they have a few extras of that if they've stopped production of it.
I hope for special guys. This is the same story. Probably Trevor now should send you a package now with Table,
Yeah, I'm on the list there as well. So as soon as he has something available, he's going to send it to us. That would be good.
Okay, good. The last thing, maybe the ratings. Do you want to say something special for somebody?
Not Really, I don't. Just
Okay.
stay cool, everybody, and have a great summer. And don't forget to play around with your Amiga.
Okay, good. So thank you for your time. I learned a lot of things. I hope the audience as well, and some ideas will be implemented sooner or later.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So it's great talking to you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm waiting for this tabor for you, and then a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
It was AMIcast, podcast for all Amiga users.